This show is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network.
To join our community Discord or see more content from our members, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com.
In today's episode, we dive deep into the group patron model and take a look at a few magic items from Tasha's that may break your game. This is the DM Shower Thoughts. Welcome back. But first, an announcement from John.
So, this is really random. Last episode, I made an oopsie. I misread the telekinetic feat. You can't shove with the telekinetic feat. The shove is flavor text in that, not mechanics text, and I just broke my own sacred rule. I am fallible, not infallible. So yeah, you can only push or pull, which makes that feat a lot less exciting. I might still take it, probably nowhere near as much as I was going to. But anyway.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's episode of the DM Shower Thoughts, the show where we talk about our shower thoughts in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop scenarios and how to become your best self through gaming. My name is Adamus.
I'm John.
And I'm Ian.
And we're going to kick things off right away into our third iteration of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. We're going to start talking about a thing. This is actually Chapter 2. We hit up a lot of items and feats and character options last time. And now, so as a lot of us have been using a storytelling hook to guide our players, this is more official rulings that show us a great path to use. And we'll just get right into it. So what we're talking about, to not be so vague, are the group patrons. This is Chapter 2 in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And group patrons, now originally I read group patrons, just the words, and thought, wait, a group patron, like a warlock? So you got like groups of warlocks, so they have a group patron that they just believed so hard in Steve Buscemi and that they became their group patron. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. But then you read the chapter and go, oh. So what we're talking about are organizations. We're talking about like assistance in your groups, but really it's that binding force of like an academy or an ancient being that everyone is sort of connected to. A guild is a group patron. A religious order would be a group patron. And we've built these before, but not with as much of this official binding. And I really like the framework that they've presented. So the following sections in this part of the book present several group patron options. The description of each patron provides an overview of the types of organizations that group patron represents, the perks of membership, that's a big deal, the perks of membership, and quests the patron encourages adventurers to undertake. Now, I've had a group patron. The Night Owls is a group patron. We have missions, we have perks, we have resources that they all pull from. It makes a lot of sense. Now we're just presenting it in this way. So having a group patron gives an adventuring group a common purpose, which inspires better coordination in the form of guidance and encouragement. As a result of this unity, each member of the party can grant advantage to an ability check, an attack roll, or saving throw of another member of the party. To grant advantage in this way, a character and the chosen target must be able to see or hear each other, and neither can be incapacitated. Once a party member grants this advantage, that individual can't do so again until they finish a long rest. This is a group assistance ability that kind of ties into, if you're all part of the same organization, then you can have this ability, which I find kind of cool. It's just a way to kind of help your team members out. But it's a one-time thing every long rest, because you understand how each other works, that you can coordinate those tasks, which I thought was a neat thing. When it comes under perks, a group patron offers your party a number of perks for your service. These range from standard business arrangements, such as a steady wage or access to staff facilities, to extraordinary boons, such as audiences with powerful figures or exceptions from certain laws. Specific perks are presented in the description of each group patron. That's fine. Now, the DM should not feel limited to providing only the perks noted in each group patron's description. A lot of the patrons that we talk about in this chapter are examples, and we can build our own patrons using these as frameworks. So patrons give a party access to solutions and support they wouldn't have otherwise, and a patron can use their varied resources to guide their agents or prepare them for greater adventures. And then you have assignments. Your group's patron occasionally offers you an assignment, a mission that provides a springboard for adventure. Of course, it's up to you how you respond to your patron's demands, and interesting stories can result if you decide to refuse an assignment. A more hands-off patron can still significantly motivate your group. Maybe you seek adventures based on what pleases your patron, possibly earning status and rewards within your organization. An academy, for example, might not organize particular missions, so you hunt down ancient artifacts, knowing that your patron will reward you for bringing them back. You have the freedom to chart your own destiny while letting the patron shape the nature of your group and the adventures you undertake. In a lot of ways, these patrons end up being almost a theme in a way, or can be. They can be the organization you begin in and then understand the corruption within, and then you rally against them, which would also be a curious storyline in the sense that you are using all those cool resources and then you have to fight against them, which is such an interesting flip-flop. But there's a lot here. Gentlemen, do you have things to add?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of history to this section, group patrons were originally printed in Aberrant Rising from the Last War as a framing device for how to structure a campaign. And the group patron idea was so praised that Wizards decided to create a setting agnostic version, which is what we see here, right? So, Spellcasting Academy can be in Eberron or Faerun or basically any high fantasy setting. So, whereas a lot of the things that were in Eberron were very Eberron specific. So one of the reasons these are kind of generic and they're more examples is because the idea is to give the DM permission or inspiration to really customize it to root the group patron in your world. One of the other things I've found is that a lot of times when you're starting a new game, the magic question that a lot of times groups have a hard time answering is, why would this colorful band of cavaliers be adventuring together, So there was, when I started Icespire Peak, it was pretty much, you're all in a tavern, and they're like, I'm going to do this job. Do you want to do this job with me? And it felt very forced and very artificial. And the players knew they didn't want to fight each other, but there wasn't really an organic way that they were able to stay on the same page. And really, if you think about it, a group patron is really just someone who gives assignments or they grant quests. Pretty much every time you play a game, there's a group patron. There is some kind of quest giver. You go do the quest, you get a reward, even if that quest giver is yourself, where it's like, oh, let's go into this tomb and get treasure to sell so we can get better equipment and sleep inside tonight, And they do have a section at the end of this chapter about how to be your own group patron. But the idea, I think, is that because they've kind of formalized the framework of how to not only design a group patron, but what different group patrons might look like, it takes a lot of pressure and unnecessary effort off of the DM so that they can more efficiently prep their sessions and prep their campaigns, so that way they and the players can kind of stay on the same page for really playing out the game that everybody has agreed to. So, and because it's kind of framed in a certain way, Adam talked a few episodes ago about the Dark Owls campaign, and Dark Owls is going to have a very different group patron than, say, Geras or Night Owls, because you mentioned Night Owls, but Swiftguard is based off of the Night Owls framework, right, which is the adventuring guild that's in Geras that all the players are a part of. So you can have the group patron be a very specific thematic character organization, or they could be as generic as y'all work for McDonald's. That's a group patron. They all pay. You get a lot of different personalities working there. But so it leaves room for you to express your character's individuality. But the idea is that there is a common purpose. And really the best campaigns, I feel, use a group patron. If someone tends to, all the counter arguments I can see coming up, in some way you could argue that yes, there is a group patron, because ultimately, if it's not an exterior motivator, the group patron is yourself.
What I've brought up in the past when it comes to Dark Owls and whatnot is that like the evil campaign, and I said one of the most important things is to have a binding force, an organization or a Dark Lord or something that you are all serving. This is it. This is the thing. That they all should have a group patron, a binding common force that is their common ground. Why would they be venturing together? Because they're all part of this thing. They've all been assigned to this team. Maybe they know each other, maybe they don't, but they're sort of bound to this patron. So, oh man, I have to work with these guys, but they do because they're part of the thing. It's a really easy way to get everybody on the same page of why would you be adventuring together? You're in this group. This is why you're adventuring. Okay, cool. And now we skip over that sort of uncomfortable role-playing segment of, well, yes, I want to play together, but why would I ever come with you?
So I really like the idea of having group patrons because, for example, if you have the Academy patron, you get access to a lot of different materials. And like you guys are saying, it skips over the awkward part of role-playing, how you get together. But what's cool is, like they say here, you get like perks and assignments. If you are running a campaign that has a lot of like necessary hardcore rules, like if you require healer's kits in order to spend your hit dice to heal, then a group patron might be a way to get those healer's kits. Or if you have weapons that are breakable, kind of like in Oblivion, then a group patron would probably be able to repair those for you without an extra cost. Now, this also means that you have to be aware of when you are near and not nearby your group patron or somebody who is a part of that organization as a whole, because that means that now you're responsible for the things that normally get kind of hand wave. So I think that's pretty cool. One of the cool role-playing things, I think that group patrons provide a lot to the party dynamic, not just because of trying to get past the awkward parts of role-playing, but like they say in assignments, if you refuse an assignment, or if you get an assignment that you feel might benefit you if you completed it differently, for example, like if you take the assignment and then go and do something slightly different during it, then that can be really cool, because then you come back to your group patron and they're like, well, why didn't you do it this way? Another thing is that your patron might require certain rules to be followed, kind of like paladin oaths. There's a lot of people who find joy and immersion in trying to keep up their paladin oaths under pressure. When it comes to your patron, if they're, for example, a benevolent patron at first, but then you start to really see their true colors, then you might be less inclined to follow the rules that they've provided for you. And then when you stop following those rules, the patron might act accordingly and remove some of their perks, or you get demoted or whatever. Worst case scenario, you get fired and they try to kill you. But I think that's one of the things that really excites me, because in my Scarlet Academy campaign, I have a group patron that is an academy for the party. And the party has received a sort of main quest from outside of the academy due to some interactions with Kelemvor. And I gave them the option to tell the academy about this, which would open up a lot of access to all sorts of resources that they might need in order to combat this threat that Kelemvor has mentioned, or not. And they chose not. And I thought that was pretty interesting, because to me, as the DM, I mean, there's a little bit of metagaming to be had there, but to me, as the DM, I found it unusual that you would want to limit the kind of resources that you have at your disposal when dealing with this particular main quest threat thing. Like, why wouldn't you want all these, like, academy guards to back you up when you go and fight the big bad? Why wouldn't you want to be able to repair your tools and weapons and things that get broken on these missions? Because the academy originally was giving them a lot of assignments to go on, but now they're just doing the main quest assignments, quote unquote. And so they don't have, because they can't tell the academy that they're on this assignment, they therefore cannot do anything with the academy with the rewards that they find on these external, excursions. Their reasoning for this was that they thought the academy might be corrupt, even though I haven't given them any like hints or whatever towards if the academy would, try and steal all their stuff. So far, they've just been purely beneficial. So there's this kind of, I guess it kind of depends on the party, but it's just as likely, I feel, that you're going to start your campaign with a group patron and have it go well and have it be like, oh, they're just always there for you and you don't have to worry about these things because I, as the DM, don't want to worry about these, this micromanaging. Or they choose to break off from that patron halfway through the campaign because they don't trust them. Oh, they don't trust the group patron that provides them with food and housing and protection. And it's like, all right. So I just that's what I like about this little chapter, is that it gives you a lot to work with. And sometimes the party just won't go for it.
Well, and you said something interesting, Ian, which is that, like, when the party starts breaking the patron's rules, you really start to see the patron's true colors. But a lot of times those rules will also reveal the player character's true colors too. And there's a lot of really interesting storytelling when you set certain boundaries that the patron has. Even a lack of boundaries will like start to tell you a lot about the patron, but it'll also start to tell you a lot about the characters. So to bring it back just a little bit, like basically the Night Owls and Swiftguard in both Adam and my campaigns, they run the Adventurers Guild model from Rising from the Last War, right? And like for the Swiftguard, one of the things is like you can't just go commit crimes, right? So we may hire criminals, but if you commit a crime that's like super serious, the guard can't associate itself with you, right? So part of it is like, now do you have characters that are willing to bend or break those rules, and what does that say about them, and their relationship with the patron, So it's like one of those things where like, you're a crooked cop, but you do get the job done, Johnny. Like it's like what kind of story do you then start to tell when, you have player characters that are strict about following the rules versus not following the rules. And you can also start to like have color your NPCs in a certain way when their relationship with the rules. So for example, the latest Garrus game that both of you were a part of, your kind of supervisor, your field officer, one of the things he said is, all right, someone came to me with a job. Technically, I can't give this job to you. They said that it'd be worth following up on, and it turns out that the client was a crime boss, and they wanted you to do something illegal. Now, that was an interesting session because we got a weird spectrum of responses to that. And I actually credit you two for handling that very well. But it did start to reveal to both me as the DM and some of the other players how their characters would actually feel about that. So, and that wouldn't have been possible without the framework of the group patron model.
In these considerations, what this actually is doing for me in reading through this group patron spot, what I find the most energizing is actually the depth of the world. By associating this is really framed a lot like what are the resources that you can give to the players. But also, these are the resources that each of these patrons can give to society, can give to the city, can give to the world. And in pondering about this, it's really interesting to explore, just from my own worlds, what patrons may exist, and recognizing that, oh, well, the priesthood that's inside Aesir, are they a religious order, or did they serve a primal force? Are they something else? Are they not a religious order based on what they get? The Fusion Knights, are they a military patron, or are they a business? And those are different things. And recognizing, or does this patron frame itself as a religious order when actually they are a syndicate? And I love the multiple layers that this can also provide, because if all the different patrons that exist, whether the players are connected to them or not, if they are presented where you can see the perks, you can see their abilities, they can see their missions, you might also have players that aren't a part of anything, and will see a certain patron at work, or a certain group that works with a patron at work, and go, I want to be a part of that. There's a group of the Valkyries of the Evernight in the Shadowfell. They are a military organization, and they serve the Evernight, which is military. And the perks that they have are very attractive to the players, very attractive to a player in particular. And they're going, well, I'm kind of a free agent right now, running around with our group patron, our own patron, but I really want to become that, because they see the benefits of this patron at work. And it lends a lot of power to the world. And it lends even more power to, when we're talking about just a city building, how do these patrons interact with society? Like looking at the noble patron. If you have maybe the perk of being in with a noble patron is you are not affected by their sphere of influence when it comes to those laws. And then you have how patrons interact with each other. And I've got a bunch of noble houses and vampire courts and fae courts, and like those are now patrons. If you can think about them from those mechanical perks, but they can clash with each other, or intermingle with each other, or it's a tense alliance. And how would you have like one group that's a part of the summer court interacting with another group that's a member of the winter court? You have the Seelie and Unseelie, and then you deal with that. And what happens if you start to see the secrets between both? What happens if someone switches patrons? What happens if you're kind of like, well, we can offer you this better benefit? And there's a lot of intermingling social ability there, but you're also allowing the players to weigh their risk and rewards based on the patrons that are available to them. And we say patrons because that's the framework of the book here, but organizations, factions, militaries, guilds, bounty hunting organizations, all of those things are patrons. And I find it really interesting because this lends a lot more depth and inspiration. I was doing this anyway. Now I have a good structured framework that I can also pull from, whether I decide to use it or not. But now it's opened for everyone and encouraged for them to add this to their world.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned like the world building implications. Like when I was reading through the group patron part, the first thing I was thinking of was gameplay implications, So one thing that a lot of players were, I don't want to say complaining about, but just observing, and it led to some interesting game design questions, was their relationship with in-game currency. Because how much is a gold piece actually worth? So it would be like, in the player's handbook, it makes it sound like a gold piece is for my game, I treat it like a $10 bill, which in our world has some weight. It has some currency, but a lot of times by the end of a campaign, you've got like thousands and thousands of gold pieces, and it's like you complete one mission and you almost get over rewarded for it. And rather than start having players pick very finite starting equipment, one of the things the group patron model allowed me to do was just completely ignore the previous structured approach of what gold meant, or what money meant in this game world, So yes, you guys get paid, but that money is meant to buy things like lodging, if you're traveling, or food. When it comes to like your equipment, your patron gives you any equipment that you want as long as you can carry it. So rather than money being the game balance thing, because it's so easy suddenly for a DM to accidentally overpower the party by giving them too much or too little gold, right? Now it's based off of, there's a separate gameplay element. And it's really, really interesting seeing how different players respond to those gameplay elements. So like for carry weight, suddenly players are like super nervous about their equipment loadout, and they're trying to find ways to shortcut the carry weight thing, when if it was just a gold thing, they'd just be like, we spend the gold, it's fine, just because their relationship with the balancing mechanic was different. So a lot of times the best storytelling and immersive experiences are a direct result of their relationship with the gameplay, which is why a lot of times, like a lot of the house rules I use are intended to simplify our understanding of gameplay, right? So that way it'll free you up to kind of choose and personalize, the flavor of your character or the weapons that they use. But to me, like one of the key things here is to think through those perks. Because if you think through those perks, not only from a world building, but a gameplay perspective, it's going to help your players be more invested in the world building part, right? So, and really, I think that this is a brilliant way to hand wave a lot of the unnecessary stuff that can sometimes limit a player's performance, just because, their starting equipment can be kind of limiting.
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting because what we're starting to touch on there is the idea of micromanaging, and I guess there was a word for it. It was like accounting or something like that. Basically, when your characters have to manage their inventory space, manage their carry weight and stuff like that, and for some people, that kind of stuff can be a lot more immersive, and it can bring them into the world because they're kind of a crunchy. that was about to sound silly. They're a crunchy player. No, they have they enjoy the crunch of numbers and stuff, and they want to figure this kind of stuff out because there's always a way. You just got to look at the numbers. On the other hand, some people don't like that kind of stuff. So what the group patron is actually providing is an opportunity to figure out with your party what kind of crunch they enjoy and what they don't, and to hand wave the stuff that they don't like through the patron. For example, repairing weapons. Sometimes that kind of thing is just like not very fun for people. I personally like it, just to be clear. I enjoy that kind of thing. I play Oblivion. And that can be annoying sometimes, though, because like if somebody, if you're doing that specific rule set that you use, John, where if you critical strike, you have the opportunity to sunder, or, you can just choose to try and sunder, as opposed to doing extra damage or something, the weapon, then, all of a sudden your favorite sword is broken and it doesn't work, and all you have is your fists. So what that can mean is that some players might not like that because they might have been attached to their equipment, especially if it was like a family sword or something. But because you have a group patron, no big deal. Just wait till after the fight. It'll be fixed. It's not gone forever. Now, like I said, I enjoy that kind of thing because I like the idea of that kind of like hardcore survival mode where eventually everything's going to break. So you better, make the best use of it that you can, and hope that you make it to the next town in time before that bear tracks you down and kills you. But yeah, I just think this is really cool because it helps you get to know your party better, like you were saying as well.
The nice thing with group patrons is that you can also kind of customize them based on, again, what your players are interested in exploring. So if your players come to you and they want a court intrigue game, that's going to look a little different than Monster of the Week, you know, episode by episode, like monster hunting, you know? So depending on kind of what your players are interested in exploring, and you can even that's a great time even before a session 0. You can just open up like a Facebook group message and just be like, listen, there's a lot of different styles of game. You throw out 2 or 3 options, and if someone has something specific, they can kind of chime in. But a lot of times your group patron can really come from the players, you know? And there is a section we'll talk about later on about being your own group patron. But what I mean by this is like, a good example is Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. Wildmount is very specifically a tense political, you know, war setting, you know? The kind of adventures and the kind of interactions you're going to have in that setting are going to be really different from something like generic Faerun, you know, where there's not an active war happening, right? Which is also going to be different than running a Feywild game, where you might have to like speak to the different courts and really understand what makes them tick and everything. The gameplay is going to be affected by the style of game that you want. And as the dungeon master, even though these are some good examples and they've got some good, you know, places to kind of inspire you, the idea is that not only can this give you leverage in creating a cool campaign, it also helps you reach out to the players of the kind of campaigns they want to explore. So like if someone says, again, court intrigue, that's gonna maybe you pick like a noble house, right? Or you pick like the sovereign, right? Versus something like, you know, I don't know. All right, I'm gonna shut up now.
Well, this is interesting too, because my biggest I'm going to say challenge, it's not a worry, it's a challenge for Grey Owl's book 2, is recognizing that the city in a way is the grander group patron, and then there are like sub patrons inside the city, and I'll call them factions. And the players, we've already had our session 0 for one of the groups, and they've started to sort of align themselves with easily certain factions. Just, oh, well, I want to be in this part of the city doing these things. I'm part of this faction. And I gain the perks of that faction. But that faction may not be in direct conflict with another faction, but they may not play that nice together. And when you have multiple players in different factions, and then all sort of serving in a way the survivalness of making sure the city functions so that they can live, I'm going to have a challenge for myself of both attending to their wants and desires through the desire to progress through a faction, and to like gain their own renown. We have ring nights where there's like a sport. It's kind of like roller derby a la Battle Angel in this city. And so you have a whole mechanics set of people that are basic mechanics, and then you have riggers that are specialized mechanics. So there's a whole economy there, and if you're a rigger, you get more perks than a standard mechanic. If you're a ringer, a ring knight, you are one of the superstars in this setting, you might be connected to a noble. So you might gain the benefits of being just a ringer and being sponsored by a noble. So you might be a part of two factions, and they may conflict with each other based on their influences. So there's a lot more layers there when you start to consider that what if the players are part of different factions, and how do they intermingle? And all of this is really is intended. Each faction has like this extra, I won't say caveat, but it's almost like an ultimatum where if they were to make a decision that would hurt the city, they don't do it, because the city must persist in order for them to continue. So in a way, all the factions serve the patron of the thing that runs the city, and they all have their own goals that may or may not conflict with each other. And I'm going to have a really exciting challenge in seeing how the players interweave with each other. And we've talked about this, and we're energized by that. Instead of them all being unified, it's these two are a part of this faction, this one's a part of this faction, and they cross often. So in those crossings, how do they interact? And what could unify them and what could break them apart? And I find that really intriguing. But we can go at this as there's a singular patron, and that simplifies something, and that gives us a framework for everyone. And you can go the heavy other side and have many patrons, and all the players are a part of each of these, and how do they intermingle? And I find both of those to be extremely fascinating, depending on the table that you're running.
Yeah, and one of the things that you brought up, Adam, was the idea of competing patrons, which as a storytelling thing, that's what happened in our last session, was that basically the same party was caught between like basically two competing rule sets. It was don't do anything illegal, but your mission is to go do something illegal for this crime boss. So you have that, but sometimes like especially if you have a secret patron, you can potentially belong to more than one faction at the same time. Do a little Skyrim thing where you're the head of the Companions and the Thieves Guild and the College of Winterhold and the Dragonborn. So it there's a funny meme where it's like when a bandit says gonna stab you in the back, but that you're the head of like all these anyway. But one of the things that's interesting is the same thing is happening in Geras. Now, as you were talking about, I realized that was something I had done too, where, there are certain players that based on their interests and based on, their story hooks, the cool thing about setting up, especially a neutral adventurers guild, where you basically can come and go as you please to just do odd jobs that require a certain set of skills, not a certain set of morality, is that now sometimes you can meet other contacts. So in like during the desert session, they met a representative from basically a secret guild that doesn't conflict with their primary group patron, but also has a very specific ethical code that it kind of follows. And sometimes I think 3 or 4 out of the 7 sessions we've played, we've introduced other faction leaders, even if the players don't recognize them as such. And that's a cool thing too, which is you can start with more of a neutral patron and then slowly, without even telling the players, introducing other patron leaders that they can choose to follow up on or choose to ignore or choose to reject, So for example, Mephistopheles from the 4th session, he is a patron leader. The party hard rejected his offer, but he's still now a contact. He's still someone in the world. So it can be really interesting to follow through on what the individual players kind of want to get out of their patron and what it means to follow through on a patron.
This also addresses an interesting and curious thing based upon, again, at the table. If we're dealing with more crunchy players, I find it very intriguing to notice what are the perks that you are receiving, and then what you consider to just be granted. And then if you were ever to fall out of favor with that patron or excommunicated from that faction, and now you lose all those benefits that you had for granted. Now we're starting to address the ideas of the haves and the have-nots. What if you're a person that is I'm just factionless? And how much more difficult is your life because of that? And then how much more attractive, if you do not align with any of these factions, is it to then build your own and to become your own crime boss, to become your own syndicate leader, to become your own academy leader? And there's a whole section about being your own patron in the book. And we can start to explore that, because what you start to address, this is a point of disequilibrium for a player, for a character, really. If they are used to having things and then you remove based on maybe their own choices or circumstances, you remove those perks and those abilities, now they either have to struggle through and find a way to make it work on their own, or join a new space, or build up their own empire. I mean, imagine a crime syndicate heavy campaign for a moment. And if you have a grunt who's a player character rising through the ranks, decides they don't align with, they don't like where this is going, and they excommunicate themselves, or they're kicked out, or they commit a wrong, they like kill the mid boss, and they're like, no, nope, and they get booted from the faction. Now, what an interesting story if they were to build their own syndicate to rival the other syndicates, to start taking out the weaker ones, to then rise through their own ranks and become this greater crime lord to rival the one that hurt them in the beginning. That's an arc, and that's amazing.
Yeah, actually, I have an interesting example of that, not with a player character, but with an NPC in my Horde of the Dragon Queen campaign, or I guess it's called Tyranny of Dragons as a whole. But the party has recently come across a character named Talus the White. And Talus the White in Hot DQ is supposed to be kind of like your in to the Cult of the Dragon. To try and like be the insurgent member of the cult who has their own priorities within the cult that may or may not involve taking down several of the cult's leaders who stand in her way. Now, I decided that this would be a little bit more interesting if instead of just that, also being able to just flat out turn her against the cult. Well, not against the cult, but just flat out convert her basically to Bahamut instead. Instead of the other one, Tiamat. We don't like her, so so the party kind of picked up on this, and I allowed them to roll persuasion to try and get her on their side, because that would provide better access, I feel, to the things she was providing as like a perk to joining her, but also stop the party from being as paranoid about betraying her or something. Because for one thing, it was going to be a lot harder without her to get into the castle that they're trying to get into right now. So I thought this would be really cool. So her motivations, instead of just being, I want to be leading the cult, that I want to be the leader who is responsible for allowing Tiamat to rise and stuff. It was less that and more, if Tiamat rises, then the cult itself, like, it can still exist, but the unifying force that is driving the cult to act and become this really powerful organization is gone, because Tiamat's already here. And, we all know what Tiamat's like. She's probably not gonna care if you not gonna care too much anyway if you were the ones helping her get out of the 9th ring of hell or whatever. And I think that it was interesting to have Talus the White realize that, kind of like if you have a cult that is worshiping this insane god and they want to bring them to the mortal realm, this person is realizing that's probably a bad idea, but the ability of this cult to perform all these actions that they're doing, just the strength of this unifying force is still really great. So what if you just keep dangling that carrot in front of them and say, all right, now you have to go over here, and then eventually we'll get Tiamat to rise and stuff like that. So from her perspective, it was more about taking over the cult for her own purposes, as opposed to still trying to get Tiamat to rise. And I thought that was a cool way to change basically the NPC's group patron, and to change the NPC's position in the cult, the group, the patron as a whole. So I wish it had happened with a player character. I think that would be a lot cooler, because there's a lot less pre-written stuff when it comes to player characters. But I didn't realize that was what I was doing until it happened. So
Yeah, no, it is really cool when that I feel is the strength of modules. It's when you put your own spin on something that can kind of surprise the players. But so the only thing I have to say on being your own patron is, as a DM and a party, you should have that conversation first before you pursue it. There's a lot of complications that come with it, including things like they mentioned in the being your own patron section. Now, things that were once a perk is now an expense because you have to pay for all that stuff, and especially if you're going to create an organization, meaning you are the one responsible for paying everyone under you, those are all expenses that you now have to take on and you now have to consider. Just like in the real world, running your own business can be extremely rewarding, or it can be unnecessarily complicated and really run you into the ground. So part of it is so there is a part to that. I would say if you're interested in pursuing the being your own patron route, they don't mention it here, but buy the Acquisitions Incorporated book. That is an entire book that is dedicated to running your own business or running your own faction. And even if that's not the exact tone you want, at least as a dungeon master, it will help give you the gameplay guidelines that you can then customize to the experience that the players are looking for.
And on that vein of customizing the experience, I have had players that want to create a crime syndicate or want to create a naval organization, but don't care about the nitty-gritty coin values of things. It's more about their influence and renown. So you can have that conversation with the player to be able to say, this is the basic cost of everything. Throw me that much gold and you have a building. And then if you hire staff, then that staff will now run that building. And you can make it very generalized, and they'll feed you information as you do missions and whatnot. Or I know of some players that are very energized by the bookkeeping part of that, even if it's on the side, like not in play. We deal with this in a Facebook Messenger thing, and this is the thing, and you set it in motion, and every now and then you get perks that come to you throughout the course of the game. Throughout the course of the campaign, you might get a missive that's sent to you with an advancement of extra gold or extra artifacts, or this magic item that was gifted to you in exchange for protection, depending on what your business was. But it can be more of a generalized building up if you've already built up the resources. I feel like there's a distinct moment actually in that group where someone came across a whole bunch of gold and they went, well, I invested in my crime business. And it was just, okay, now that's on me. They want me to take care of that bookkeeping. I assume that their very intelligent character takes care of that, and then I just do it all. And they don't have to worry about any of those downtime activities. They happen in the background, like hitting play on a program. And then I know of other players that want to be in on all that bookkeeping. So it doesn't have to follow this exactness in Tasha's. It doesn't have to follow the business downtime activities model in the DMG. You can make it as intricate or as generalized as you want, but it does remain an option. And for me especially, it provides the opportunity and permission and inspiration to create the story beats of how they gain renown and power and influence, not necessarily the monetary amounts. I think those can remain in the background. What matters here is the story they're trying to tell. So I would set it up as you need a contact. You need someone who's going to run the business while you're away, or you need a partner in this. Now they seek a story hook of getting a partner. Now they're finding people that either they can coerce by fear or trust or find loyalty. And there's a different social structure there. If you found an NPC friend, but you scared them into helping you, what happens when they become more confident and they rise up against you? Maybe they try to steal your business from you. And that has nothing to do with money. That's all about your relationships. But instead, if you saved someone from a horrible fate and they trust you like a friend, hey, we're in this together, they're a lot less likely to turn on you. And that's huge. So what we're building there is, again, not a monetary bookkeeping scenario. What we're building is a set of relationships, a currency of relationships. And that provides deeper storytelling and deeper abilities that also tie into the world. Those are our world building hooks. Tons of things they can tie into that. And when factions clash, heck, you could scalp somebody from another faction and say, man, doesn't it suck that you have to answer to him? You work for me. You didn't have to answer to anybody. We'll be partners. That's massive. And how much does that then change the dynamics between that player and that NPC? And then if the party is trying to make their own organization, not just an individual, we've been saying it like it's an individual, but if the party's making that organization, are they going to start pulling ties from other factions as well? Finding the sad and downtrodden, or the people who want different types of power and bringing them in as well? Find the people who have been wronged by this one nobleman and then all rally and create something that's going to overthrow them because they want what they have. This is cool.
Yeah, it really lends itself to that storytelling element. If you are interested in those social interactions that not only have to do with just person to person, but also like, city to city, or, town to town, faction to faction. And it's also interesting because we've been talking a little bit lately about, how we like to write short narratives or short fictions. Adding world building through writing short fiction, and it's something that I've been wanting to do on the YouTube channel as well, which is just go through these and actually tell them like a short story in a video format. And I think when we start considering these things, yes, it has really great game implications, game storytelling implications, but it also has really great story writing implications, and that's really cool. Like this kind of stuff, honestly, like you could take the things in Tasha's, the things in the DMG, and roll and create short stories based on what you roll on these tables. And I really like that.
Welcome back, everyone, and we're going to take a look at magic items, but not a lot of them. Magic items in Tasha's are pretty extensive. We've added in a lot more items, a lot more artifacts, some rather terrifying. We've got our Illuminator's tattoo, many different tattoos. Prosthetic limbs are there, which is a thing that is a theme in Grey Owl's book 2. I wouldn't have them require attunement, but I think that's a setting choice, not a necessarily a criticism of the book. However, there are some magical items that are presented here that provide curious concerns here and there, and I think I'm going to turn it over to John to address at least one of those.
Yeah, so one of the more legitimate criticisms of this book as a whole is that one of the things it introduces to 5th edition is power creep. And power creep a lot of times can be very dangerous for a game economy, because what it does is it starts to devalue some earlier options in favor of more powerful options. I can't remember who said it, but it was, I think, one of the developers of Civilization, who said, given the choice, players will optimize the fun out of a game system. And you see this with D&D. Actually, Taking 20 recently had a video on Pathfinder 2nd edition and how the illusion of choice basically broke the system for him. He doesn't really, Cody doesn't like running that system, because even though there's supposedly all these customized options, it really, you start seeing the same action priority over and over again. So what was this thing? I don't know.
That was me visualizing that, you have all these options, but then there's only one obvious choice.
Yeah. And, actually another Wizards product, Magic the Gathering, is really suffering from that right now. In their standard format, a lot of players are very critical of standard because just there are only a few decks that actually work. So, and there's like all these constant bannings and stuff. So with Tasha's, part of the power creep isn't like some of the options, it's the breadth of what it introduces to the system. So a lot of the subclasses are just objectively more powerful than anything you'll get in the player's handbook, right? So things like some of like the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer is just more powerful than Wild Magic 100% of the time. And a lot of times that can break the fun for a lot of people. For me, part of the fun of different subclasses is not only finding unique situations that allow them to shine, but also measuring different amounts of risk and reward. So you might have a subclass like Bear Totem Warrior that's more generally effective, but then Path of the Beast in the right party composition might shine more so than like the more generally effective subclass, So one of the things that concerns me is just when statistical power is valued over qualitative power. Right? And what I mean by that is there is a whole set of magic items for casters here that basically allow casters of the right attunement to get a +3 bonus to their spell attack modifiers and their spell save DCs. Before this book, the most a spellcaster could increase their spell save DC by was 1, right? That was kind of the precedent that was set, meaning a player character wouldn't really have a spell save DC more than 20. Right? If you max out all their stats and everything. I guess technically if they found the right tome, they could possibly get a 21, but even that was pushing it. Now you're talking the new standard is a 22, possibly a 23. DMs a lot of times in 5th edition have trouble challenging their players already. A lot of times the system by itself, if you use the monster stat blocks as written, if the DM brings a monster with an appropriate challenge rating, a lot of times the players just kind of steamroll over it, especially if they understand the system. So to see something like this is just a little concerning because it makes it so that you have less total options because there are some obvious ones. So, and what this also does is it allows a DM to put on a designer's hat, go back to some of the old options, and see if there's things we can give them specifically, So, for example, one of the things I do credit this book with is there are some magic items that are specific to the Ranger. I think that's awesome. I think, like, Holy Avenger is a Paladin-specific magic item. Ranger finally has it. There are no fighter or barbarian ones, though, which is something to kind of keep your eye on. So as we're kind of looking at this stuff, maybe there is a magic item that we customize for specifically a hunter ranger. There haven't been any subclass specific magic items, or maybe it's that we reward our players with a bonus feature for doing some downtime training. There's a lot of different ways that we can like make those old classes feel a little more relevant. One of the things that this is just going to happen anytime you introduce new options, you're always going to introduce power creep, right? So because now you are getting new multi-classes and you might get new spells and you might get new builds and stuff. And while that's going to naturally happen, introducing options that are just objectively more powerful than what's already existing also isn't going to really help. So the other thing, though, as a DM, you can choose not to use these magic items, but the trend of this design, I feel anyway, does warrant some concern. We also get a lot of really cool magic items. Like Adam was mentioning some of the artifacts. Like the Cauldron of Rebirth is like really flavorful and really cool. Baba Yaga's Mortar and Pestle is there's some really cool, very story-rich fodder there that can be used for really like satisfying experiences. But again, the general just add +3 to a bunch of stuff. To me, really what it does is it just gives the players a lot of power without a lot of risk.
And speaking of that risk, When I look at specifically those items, I am looking at the Arcane Grimoire, which is a wondrous item. It starts at uncommon, then rare, then very rare, and it requires attunement by a wizard. Now, I would even up the rarity that instead of very rare, it's legendary, and then very rare, and then rare. But an Arcane Grimoire, I look at that and go, well, I don't think that would be in a magic shop. I wonder. Okay, first, I think super powerful items require a quest. That if you are going to even introduce them into a game, there's a risk and reward for this. They require some sort of challenge. Now, the easy answer is, well, it costs 50,000 gold pieces. Well, someone just found 5,000 platinum. There's your +3 item. Good job. Or it requires a quest. It's sealed away in a mountaintop, and there's only minimal lore about it. And you have to traverse this, and it's guarded by a pit devil, or it's guarded by a sea of chain devils, or it's guarded by a celestial, and you need to convince the celestial that you'll use it for good. And that's the only way. He'll have to challenge your spirit and your morality in order to give to this and allow you to use it. The other option there is, when I look at that book in particular, instead of there being 3 books or 1 book of a certain rarity, what if it's 1 book and you actually have to unlock its rarities? So you get it and it's rare and you get a +1. I know that's not what it says in the book, but I'm upping the rarities. So you get it and it's +1. And then through a series of quests and tasks and unlocking of it, it becomes a +2. And that may include suffering on the player's perspective. So you're not just gaining power. You might have to give up something in order to increase its, let it digivolve to +2. And now this is much more of a story-driven thing that has a mechanical reward. And it can be deep-seated in the lore of the world and the personal arc of the character. I introduced a crazy homebrew item, which is called a Stray Wand, in the Shadowfell campaign that has all these random effects, and it levels up with the caster, and it becomes more and more powerful and more easily controlled. But it had caused so many problems and so many risks with the surrounding party. The character, decided to destroy it. Decided that the risk wasn't worth the reward and destroyed it. And there went that whole progression. I had this big thing planned for them, and they just wrecked it. Because story-wise, having that powerful thing in the world, yes, it was going to be pretty insane. And the risks that it was providing and the story that it was beginning to tell was too dangerous in the eyes of the character. So this is another way for us to add a lot of value and depth to something. If you feel that an item is really powerful, then maybe we shouldn't look at it like it's a straight mechanic. We look at it as it's a quest. We can add layers to it to make it even more valuable. But I would say, like in IO, an Arcane Grimoire, there's 1. That's it. and if you lose it, like say you've unlocked it to +3 and you die, it goes back to +1. Or something happens. Maybe you break one of its bonds. Maybe it has an oath that you have to take and you break the oath. Now it's just a book. Maybe there are consequences to this power. And that's really cool to consider. So even as you're looking through these and you're like, man, that looks really powerful, we can put on the designer hat as well, and the storyteller's hat, and try to add more depth to the components of this.
So, yes, and I'm going to throw a curveball, because part of my concern with this, first of all, I like that approach from a storytelling perspective. As a gameplay perspective, the one thing I've seen is, why do they get a cool thing and I don't? So if there's only 1, now why do they deserve to be more powerful than I do, and now I can't contribute as well? Because they get a +3 thing and I can't. And then if you try to give 1 to everybody, now we're back to square one where everybody has a super-powered magic item, So the other thing this is from Treant Monk. which is because this is given to spellcasters, which already tend to be more fun to play and more powerful than their martial counterparts. This now encourages players to play spellcasters more. And if you have a character that plays a martial character, because there's not like martial specific items that are just as powerful, it can make it a lot, or not even less powerful, but less interesting. Because remember, a spellcaster turn by turn can pick different spells that they cast at different spell slot levels, that they can switch up damage types, especially with some of the subclasses in Tasha's. Like, playing a spellcaster is a very engaging turn-by-turn puzzle that you get to solve. As like a fighter or a barbarian, run up and hit the closest thing. That's the choice that you get. And again, it's not even really a choice. You're just there to roll a dice and tell the DM the number you got. But you're not making a lot of active decisions. So to take a set of classes that is already characterized by their interesting choices and giving them statistical power to outcompete classes that are by definition less interesting, that's where the concern comes from. So not only is there like, depending, I've been at the tables where players get jealous of each other for how much more power another player gets. I think it really kind of depends on your table. And if we look at this from the Adventurers Guild model, where Adventurers League, I'm getting my terms mixed up, where you can just build your own character. It's like, take a very rare item from the book, you know? Now all of a sudden, you know, the power creep is real. And the power creep can suck the fun out of it, especially since it's not like, for me, let's say it's this instead, right? Where you get a number of charges. You get 3 charges per long rest to increase your spell save DC on a spell by 3, you know? Now there's a resource you gotta allocate. I'm always in favor of like, you have to spend something to do it instead of like, or create some kind of condition rather than just, you get a flat bonus, you know? Actually, this one would be really interesting for the Arcane Grimoire. It's very rare. It's a +3, but it only works on spells of 2nd level or lower. Now, all of a sudden, as a wizard, you're starting to be like, well, I could cast Disintegrate, but it doesn't work as often, but it's more powerful when it does. Or I can try to cast this 2nd level spell, you know, and maybe that works differently. So there are ways that you can change it. And I think that, Adam, all the suggestions you made, I have met players that would be such an exciting and energizing thing for them to play out. I just also know it's kind of like a read your table sort of thing, where for some players that's going to upset them, or it'll make them feel like the game is dragging on and they aren't meaningfully contributing, which is its own problem to address. But you know,
I think about the as a very quick aside, and in this, the idea of questing for items, and that everybody gets one in a way. This is, I mean, okay, so 2 things really. IO has what we call legacy items. They are ancient things that were made in the first age or like past ages, and the idea is that whatever it is, it was crafted by one of the prime gods, and it levels up with you. That like you can unlock pieces of it, and that makes it more powerful as you go. Now, they've gone through some iterations. Some got really OP, and I've since adjusted them as you unlock them. But you have to like give a fair amount of pieces of yourself, or do certain things in order to unlock them. And all of them are kind of a puzzle in and of themselves. Like you could have a sword made by an angel, and it only levels up, it only like becomes more powerful if it kills a fiend. And that's, do you now go seek out a bunch of fiends and go kill them? Or, you know, it's a little bit different that way. But in so doing that, there became oh, isn't that cool? And it levels up. Isn't that neat? But then if anyone had a legacy item, they were going to become exponentially more powerful than their party members if they were able to unlock it. And that was cool because it had story elements, but it also provided, and I did that at the time to fix the ranger. The ranger was very underpowered, so I gave them a special bow that was a legacy item, and it would slowly unlock more abilities. But then they became ridiculous. So, oopsies, I went too far. But now I think about Critical Role. There's an arc in Campaign 1 where they fight a bunch of dragons. And these dragons are, at the time when they show up, an insurmountable threat. Like, they cannot handle a conclave of the Chroma Conclave of 5 chromatic dragons. They do not have the power set to deal with this. So they go on quests to find ancient items called the Vestiges of Divergence that are pretty powerful on their own, and they can be unlocked to become like the exalted versions of themselves and require certain things to be unlocked. And then but now they all have superpowered items so that they can go fight the dragons and go deal with them. And then they keep those items through their final arc too. Now, this made it so each one had a personalized thing, and they're all waiting to figure out how these pieces are going to become unlocked. And it was always a great celebration at that table. It's clear that they were all energized by this prospect. So they were all there for the story being told by each of the vestiges. And then when each one unlocks based on its certain triggers, it was a great celebration at the table. That's huge. So it's cool. But if you're at a different table, and now if you ever sit back and go, well, now we just all have superpowers, and now we can't, whatever. It's still back to square one. But also that table, they were dealing with superpowered ancient dragons that each have at least 600 hit points, maybe thousands of hit points based upon weird gems that have been jammed into their bodies. And they're massively huge creatures. Instead of their regular gargantuan size, they're like gargantuan size. Like, they're dealing with a threat that is definitively not in the book. Like, this is something that goes outside of the realm of what is in the raw. So now they get to have things that are outside of the realm of the raw so they can match it. And I can totally understand that momentum from a storytelling perspective and from making sure that we have just enough of a chance to take down this dragon, just to put us a little bit more in that framework. It's cool. And I think it depends table to table.
Yes, so you guys have been saying a lot of the things that I was thinking about, which is really that to deal with power creep, we really just have to, as DMs, go through each item that we want to use and say, okay, you still get this stuff, but this, and this rather. I like the idea of having risk versus reward conundrums. That's something that I've always valued in my player characters as well. I've had, with Rowan, there was the question of, is it worth the risk to strike a pact with Lulth, like the Spider Queen, who's almost always going to betray you with everything, but, at least for that moment, I would have the power I need or something like that. And so that's something that I was just thinking about. Another example of, instead of just like these things unlocking as you grow stronger, another way is that if you need that +3 bonus or something, maybe you have to give some of your life force, almost not your hit points necessarily, but something of you that temporarily reduces, one of your stats, maybe, kind of like those life drain kind of things where with wights, they can touch you and drain some of your hit points, your max hit points away temporarily. And the other thing is maybe using exhaustion as well. Maybe using this artifact or just this +3 item requires that you take on a point of exhaustion. That requires not a long rest, but a full rest to get rid of. And so a full rest being 24 hours, by the way, for anybody who's wondering. And I think that would be something that could balance this kind of stuff out, because exhaustion is so detrimental when you get up into those like 3-4 points or something like that. That's why nobody likes to play the Berserker Barbarian, because they're so scared of taking exhaustion points after they rage, I'm pretty sure is how it works. And even if you get all these nice boons, exhaustion is so it can kill you. 6 points, you're dead. So if I was a DM trying to use some of these, what we're considering power creep magic items, I would say they're kind of cursed. It's not that there's just a charge, or it's not just that as you level up as a character, you get access to what's inside them more and more. They're cursed. You get access to the strongest, version of that item right off the bat, but you have to give up something. And that something depends on the character. So like, somebody who's got their second highest stat in Con isn't going to really care as much if they have, a temporary reduction in HP for 24 hours or something like that, because they've already got so much HP. Unless you make it a percentage, in which case it would probably be a lot more. But, a wizard is going to be more concerned about that HP reduction, or more concerned about having a point of exhaustion. I don't know. It's something that I would do. Now, moving on to magic items that I am interested in personally. I am a sorcerer at heart. I love meta magic. Meta magic is my jam. I like choosing from all the cool things, even though like there's a few of them that like you kind of just have to take because they're the best ones, like Twin Spell or Quicken Spell. Heighten Spell is another really good one. But what's cool is that Tasha's provides us with these shards called the Far Realm Shard, the Feywild Shard, and the Shadowfell Shard. And each of these has to do with your meta magic as a sorcerer. Now, since there is a oh wait, never mind. I was gonna say, since there's a meta magic feat, you can just take that and then take these shards, and then you get the cool shard effect. But actually, it does require attunement by a sorcerer, so you cannot mix and match that kind of thing. You actually have to have levels in sorcerer. But what's cool is that they have all sorts of different effects when you use meta magic. So for the Far Realm Shard, creatures have to make a charisma saving throw. Ooh, that's actual power creep right there, because nobody uses charisma saves. At least not like,
well, banishment does.
Banishment, yeah, banishment's pretty good, but like, it's one of those rarer saves. Usually it's like a wisdom save when it's a mental.
Yeah, it's not your wisdom save.
Yeah, and so otherwise they take 3d6 psychic damage. I can see that. I can see why that's the sorcerer, because it's charisma. The Feywild Shard gives you a chance to roll on the wild magic surge table. So you can just get wild magic effects even if you're not a wild magic sorcerer. It only works once per day if you're not a wild magic sorcerer, but still, that's pretty cool, because my favorite thing about wild magic sorcerer is the wild magic. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, but you don't want it all the time, then this could be an idea for, as a DM. It is uncommon, the Feywild Shard. That's pretty telling, I guess. Whereas the Far Realm Shard was rare. And then just the last one here is the Shadowfell Shard, which is right here, which is also rare. And what this one does is when you use meta magic, you actually can choose a targeted creature's ability score, and until the end of your next turn, that creature has disadvantage on ability checks and saving throws with that ability, which is like really strong. Like we were talking about like how we are increasing spell save DCs and stuff. But if you think about it, the statistics are way, way steeper when you start imposing disadvantage on stuff. I think a couple of episodes back, we were saying 75% or something. Like if you have advantage, your 50% turns to 75%. And then if you have disadvantage, it turns to 25% or something like that. So that's really strong. As a player, really excited about that stuff. As a DM, I'm like, it's too strong. No, don't, you're not getting it. But at just one other thing there was that, you could, if you wanted to use these, you could make them kind of not just rare, like, oh, I have to pay a certain amount of gold to find it. You can also make it so, since they're shards, maybe you have to go to these places to mine them. Maybe they are actually used for something else entirely in the places they come from. And when you take them to the material plane, that's when they get all these weird effects, because you're tainted, you're corrupted by those kinds of things. So I think that's a pretty cool storytelling device as well that you can set up for your characters, especially if they're really interested in the Feywild or the Shadowfell. Like in my Academy campaign, they want to go to those places. I kind of messed up and made the whole thing about the whole first arc about necromancy, but we'll get there.
It's always necromancy. It's an easy thing to hit up. When I saw the Feywild shards, I admit I read them, I kind of skimmed it quickly and went, oh, that's cool, and completely missed the whole when you use a magic option, because it requires attunement by a sorcerer. And my designer brain, I wonder, if I just remove requires attunement by a sorcerer, and I remove the metamagic idea, and just adjust here and there, wouldn't it be interesting if you could stick that shard into a weapon? And this is where we tie into John's stuff with spell gems. He made a really strong, really, really good use of making each class interesting, and especially my martial classes, when I get to play a fighter, to be able to make cool choices. And I mean, it came down to subtle effects and elemental-ish damage, as well as like psychic damage, and would have some overlays of effects with what he's put together. And how neat could it be to have something you jam into your sword that you hit somebody and it causes wild magic to happen? And how cool would that be? And then if it's also wild magic, it could be really powerful, and maybe it cracks over time. I like the idea of expendable magical items. And when they start introducing all these different shards, it makes me think, well, this is a piece of something bigger, a piece of a greater artifact, or a greater vein in the dark mines of the Shadowfell, or one of the edges of the Far Realms. And how did they get it? But if it's a shard, it's a piece. And if it's a piece, can it break? And if we start to expand upon this is not necessarily a review of the book anymore, but this book does a lot to inspire. I am thinking a lot about, if there are pieces of them, they break. And maybe they don't require attunement they require attunement, but they don't require attunement by a certain class. Or maybe they only require attunement by a barbarian, because they'll swing it. And if they break, then you have to find more of them. How do you find more of them? Oh, golly gee willikers. Now there's a quest. And if they're now a resource you can burn that have a certain power, that's really cool. Then are you looking for other mining artifacts? Are you finding a stronger vein of one thing or another? Are you going, well, no, the purple stuff is underneath this tower in the Shadowfell, and then you go find that shard. I wonder what this does, and you discover, oh, this shard is, I don't know, this one is an elemental essence shard, but instead of air, earth, fire, or water, this one is force, or this one is psychic. This one is alien. It came from where the Illithid came from, and now you shove that in your battle axe, hit it, and now you're dealing psychic damage, but it can crack. Or they have a saving throw, and now they have Bane on them if you hit them. Oh no, but it can crack, and it could explode. Or you have this cool risk versus reward thing. There's a lot more here than just what is presented in the book. And just like the future DM tools that I'll hit up later, there's a lot there that is just scraping the surface of what is possible. What becomes possible when we start to open up these possibilities? None of the things in this book, for me, are the strict, this can go here and no further. All of these are starting points for me. They are elements that now I can take and turn on their head and break and rebuild, because this has opened the door. Now I have the framework, and I can I can bend it to my will and build it to my universes.
I'm first of all, thank you for the compliment, because I did work very hard on that system. To speak to storytelling possibilities, as you mentioned, like the Far Realm Shard, right? One of the subclasses we get in Tasha's is the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, and it's like, what's your origin? Maybe you accidentally touched a Far Realm Shard, and it warped your mind, and now you're like, I do as the crystal guides, and you just try to find as many as you can, you know? So, you know, I did spew a lot of criticisms towards magic items and power creep and stuff, and mostly my solution to it ultimately is to ignore rarity and not even use the magic items as written. So I've always found that the magic items of 5th edition are grossly imbalanced and inconsistent. Best example, Ring of Protection and Cloak of Protection do the same exact freaking thing, and one is rare and one is uncommon. So there's not any consistency even within like one book about how powerful some of these effects are. So one of the things I really did was, instead of trying to reward my players with a magic item that has a package of powers, kind of like a feat, I just took out the properties, right? So this is more just kind of functional advice if you're a DM and you want to reward your players with better equipment without having to worry about the stress so much about different stuff. I just tiered the properties in 3 ways. So obviously, like a +3 bonus to something is a higher tier than a +1 bonus to something. But I just looked at all of the different magic items that you could reward your players with. I took their properties, and then I made the decision, is this a mundane or a magical property? If it was a mundane property, that's something they can add to their weapon, armor, accessory, or whatever as an upgrade that makes their equipment more powerful, but also breakable. If it's a magical property, that's something they have to attune to. So it's not as easily broken, but also they can only have so many of them. So, and that's where the upgrade spell gem system really comes from, is just taking these properties and deciding, you know, when level wise would they get access to these properties. So as player characters, levels 1 through 8, you guys only have access to uncommon properties, right? Once you hit level 9, you can start taking rare properties. And then once you hit 17th, you can start taking very rare properties. Legendary properties or legendary items. Those are like Adam said, one thing only in the world that we may discover as part of a quest. But your character's operational effectiveness is not impacted by legendary items. You can basically craft your own +3 item, but because you're customizing it based on choosing the properties, by choosing a +3 spell save DC bonus, you are also not choosing a bunch of other properties. So rather than just getting, oh, my spell casting is +3, yay, you know, now it's like, yeah, you might be able to do that, but there are other options that you're not taking that could be more interesting, more fun, even more effective than that. So and the other thing is, by making the statistical part of the item, of the equipment, mundane, it also means that it's breakable. So the other thing I really don't like about 5th edition's magic item rules is they're pretty much invulnerable to everything. They're invulnerable to rust. They're invulnerable to damage. Anytime you do something, it's like, this will light something on fire unless it's a magic item. And to me, that now makes it so that it never gets challenged. So even if you're a 17th level character and you're a +3 spell save DC arcane focus, that arcane focus could get targeted and sundered and destroyed, you know? So Ian did mention, I do run Sunder Rules. I've heavily edited them since starting to playtest them because they were a little confusing. They were a little inconsistent. The way that my Sunders work now, basically you can make a called shot to target the item. If you hit it, the target is damaged. If you hit it again, it's destroyed. If you critical hit, instead of dealing double damage, you can choose to instantly destroy a piece of equipment the other person is wearing, which now makes enemy combatants that much more dangerous, because a goblin that gets a nat 20 can destroy your +3 arcane focus. Now think about what that risk and reward looks like. The other thing, though, is you can also hide it in places. So that goblin can only destroy pieces of equipment it can perceive. Now there's a whole other thing. There's a whole other game to play. But that's the idea, is that not only does this affect the gameplay within a session, it changes the mindset and it creates a game of preparing for a session. Because you guys can rebuild your characters all you want. So you might choose that, one time we're going into a lot of social interaction, I want a higher spell save DC so I can get my suggestions to go off. Next time, we're going to be blasting things in a dungeon. Let me take a higher spell attack bonus so that my Eldritch Blast can hit more often, And my last little thing, and it's actually in my reference doc and everything, like Adam mentioned a lot of cool things you can do with shards. It's in there. You guys can make up your own stuff and present it to me. Like the stuff I came up with, that's just what's in the book, what's been dissected and kind of moved around. Totally open to players wanting to create their own effects, or be like, I saw this effect from a Feywild shard, or that I want to try to the whole spell gems as a rule set got rewritten because my mom had an idea to hide an elemental spell gem inside of her bracer so it couldn't be targeted, but still be able to use it as part of her attacks. So if you put your spell gem in your weapon, there might be a different effect than if you hide it in your bracer to do certain things. It might be better, it might be weaker, all that kind of stuff. So, excuse me. So really the idea is I really want to give my players a toolkit where they can create their own identity-defining items while still maintaining the performance effectiveness, or having an effective performance with their character in play. So again, the setting wraps around the gameplay. It's something Cody from Taking 20 said, bringing him up again, that when you world build, the world should revolve around the gameplay experience that you want and the gameplay choices that you want your players to make. And for me, that prep beforehand is part of the game experience.
Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode of the DM Shower Thoughts. This podcast airs every Friday at noon on Podbean, Spotify, and iTunes. If you want early access to episodes, custom materials, and behind-the-scenes chat and after show, go check out our Patreon at www.patreon.com/DMShowerThoughts, all one word. Go watch our faces at our YouTube channel, DM Shower Thoughts. Read our words at AdamusDrakeProductions.com over at the GM's Corner. And also find us over on Facebook at DM Shower Thoughts, Twitter, DM Shower Thoughts. No, Twitter, DMST Podcast. There we go. And go visit Ian at our Twitch channel over at Twitch for DM_shower_thoughts. Have a wonderful day, and please, game responsibly. Bye-bye now.
Games are fun to play. Whether it's chess, Mario Kart, or Dungeons & Dragons, we've all sat down to play a game with our friends before. But what is it that keeps us coming back to our favorites? How do developers craft the experiences that keep us this engaged? I'm Sully, host of the podcast Fun But Why. Join us as we talk to game industry professionals and break down the levels, mechanics, and design of their favorite gaming experiences. Fun But Why releases new episodes every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.